Hi, this is the fifth session of this introductory course. So far we've seen phonetics, articulatory phonetics, how speech sounds are pronounced, how they are articulated, and we started also with phonology, talking about distinctive sounds, phonemes, allophones, minimal pairs, etc. Today this is going to be a very short session on distinctive features, and I'm going to keep it short because distinctive features can be a little bit much or a little bit complicated sometimes, so better to do just the necessary for today. So a little bit of background. The idea of distinctive features is originally based on generative phonology. However, today, basically, as far as I am aware, all theories of phonology use them. However, it did start with generative phonology with Chomsky and Hill, and the main idea is that you want to have phonological descriptions of phonological processes, and those descriptions are based on rules. Now, those rules you want to write in a fashion that that's likely to be correct and compact and precise. And for that, the best way to do things is to use features. So, what are we talking about here? Take, for example, this process in Cree. So, in Cree, the phonemes P, T, and K become B, D, and G in a specific context, namely between two vowels. This is a type of voicing assimilation, as we discussed in the last class. And imagine that you're trying to describe the phonology of Cree. What you could do is simply write a statement like this. So, in this context, these sounds become these sounds, and that's in principle fine. However, this sort of misses a generalization, namely that there is something in common, systematically in common between P and B, T and D, and K and G, namely voicing. So you want a way of writing the systematic patterns in a more compact manner. So you could express this something like this: any voiceless plosive is voiced between any two vowels. And here we're using phonetic features, but this is basically what we want to do. We want to use features which are common to different segments to make generalizations across those segments. In this case, we're generalizing across plosives in Cree. And for this, we're going to use features. And connected to the idea of features is the idea of natural classes. And natural classes are classes of sounds that share a feature or a set of features, and that very crucially, that pattern together in a language. And using features allows us to generalize or to capture classes, natural classes. Yes, this is what I just mentioned. So here's a very general example of the idea of natural classes. This is still mostly based on phonetics and what we already saw about segments, but it already starts expressing the concept of natural classes. So you see this sort of sets of sounds. We can start with, for example, here we have plosives. We saw this create a complete closure of the air passage, and then there's a release. But you also have affricates, which do something similar to that. And then you also have some of these stridents, they're called, including sibilants and nasals, all share the feature that they generate a full closure of the passage. So it's not just plosives, but all these sounds, even though they have certain differences, can be grouped together as occlusives. And a different set of sounds are obstruents. These also include fricatives and some other stridents which are not in the occlusives. Continuants, the air keeps on passing through the air cavity, through the mouth, without a full closure like in the occlusives. And here we had discussed that for fricatives, but they are also true, or this is also true for other sounds, here including vowels. So this is a group which is including vowels and fricatives on this property that the is continuous. We know that between fricatives and vowels there's a difference. Between vowels create no obstruction, but fricatives do. However, there is no complete closure, which is what links them together. So this very simple idea, there are groups of sounds that share some properties, will be very, very important for us and for you in the future to be able to properly write rules and descriptions of languages. So to express those things, we're going to use features, and features are subsegmental phonological units. They are mostly based on some articulatory basis of speech, but very importantly, they are not phonetics. So features in phonology are not phonetics. They are about grouping sounds which behave similarly in a language, and the names and the grouping have to do with the articulatory properties of those phonemes, but the features themselves are not about phonetics. They are about the fact that certain sounds group together in different processes. So features are binary, more or less. Usually you have plus and minus signs for each feature, but sometimes you can also use a null. And so plus signs means that the feature is present, a minor sign indicates that the feature is absent, and a null sign indicates that the feature cannot apply to that particular sound, and we will see this in a bit. Now, using features, we can represent phonemes as feature bundles, and this is important. And another important point here is that different phonological theories will make use of different features. So unlike phonetics, which are more or less universal, the features in phonology are not, and there are differences between theories. So this is worth keeping in mind. And also many theories allow for different languages to have different sets of features depending on how the sounds behave in those languages. So I'm going to give you a very quick rundown on what the features are for vowels and consonants, and but it's important to take a look at an actual table. I think that's easier than just discussing them in the abstract. But basically, vowels are described as not being consonants. Sometimes instead of consonant you have syllabic, so vowels would be plus syllabic instead of minus consonant. So that already shows you something, which is it doesn't really matter whether you take it from one perspective or the other. If you want to make it from the perspective of consonants, then you just have to say that they are minus consonant. And if you want to make it from the perspective of the vowels, then you say they are plus vowel, or syllabic, which is the usual feature, and consonants are minus that. So either way works equally well, and it doesn't actually matter. These are things we had seen before. They have length. You're aware that vowels in many languages contrast in length, so some vowels can be plus long or minus long. Sometimes there's another feature for some languages regarding length. They have a place of articulation, which is either front, central, or back, and this we saw regarding how vowels are articulated, whether they are in the front of the mouth, in the middle, or in the back. And they also have features for height. These are often high, mid, low. Many languages do not require central or mid, and you can express enough contrasts just with front, back, high, and low. They have rounding, and sometimes they also have ATR and other features. We'll see them in a bit. For consonants, you have that they are consonant or that they are not vowel, whether they are sonorant or not. You have about place of articulation, labial, which has to do with the lips, coronal, which means that the tongue raises back or high, back and high, which is whether they articulate up or in the back, whether they are continuous or not, nasal or not, lateral or not, and voiced or not. And this is what I was mentioning just now. And here are a couple of examples of feature bundles which describe sets of natural classes in English. And these are natural classes in English. That doesn't mean that they will be natural classes in, say, Swahili or Quechua or Pitiantara. Yeah, natural classes are not universal, and they are language specific. In this particular case, we can say that these consonants are minus sonorant and minus continuant. This group is minus sonorant and minus voiced. This is minus sonorant and plus voiced, etc. So, using feature bundles, we can target individual sets of phonemes at once, and that's kind of the point. So here is a brief description of the individual features. Consonantal, so they are consonants, there's a major obstruction. Syllabic is about vowels, but they are syllable pick or not. Sonorant, that they are sonorant sounds. Continuant, whether the flow of air is free or nearly free. There's something called delay released, which is about affricates. You remember those are the cases where two phonemes are basically articulated together at the same time, something like t, d, j, p, etc. Then we have nasal. This is the same as in the phonetic feature, whether the velum is lowered or not, and there is air coming through your nasal passage. Lateral. These are sets of sounds. We had seen them. They include L and R, where the sound goes around your tongue basically when it's raised. I have some laryngeal features, which is about the larynx. So you have voice with the there's voicing or not. You have a feature for spread glottis, which is about aspirated sounds. You have a feature for constricted glottis, which is sounds made with a closed glottis. We'll see that in a second. You have some features about place of articulation. These are labial, and the point here is that they are about using both lips, so mostly bilabials. You have an additional feature which has to do with the lips, which is rounding, and this helps you distinguish mostly vowels which have rounding. So, for example, the difference between E and U. One is unrounded and the other one is rounded. You have the coronal features. We saw that this is where the articulator, like the tongue tip or the blade, is raised. And you can further distinguish phonemes with the anterior and strident features. The anterior is for the alveolar-palatal region. So if something's anterior, that means that it's in front, meaning it's in the alveolar-palatal region, and something's strident, that's for affricates, for fricatives and affricates. Then you have dorsal features. This is the body of the tongue, and you can say that it's either high, low, or back. Yes, so that's a brief description of the features. Now, that was maybe a little bit abstract, and I find it very difficult to just picture like that in my head. I think it's much easier to look at a table and see what each feature is actually doing. This is some sort of universal feature chart, but as I mentioned before, there are no actual universal features. This is an attempt at building a feature chart with which you can contrast most common segments, or most common segments in the world's languages. But that doesn't mean that this is necessarily a good table for any individual language. So this you can think of as a sort of template which you can use to start from once you're doing the analysis of some language. I've uploaded this table. It is quite important and quite useful. I would seriously recommend that you download it, take a look, and it includes basically everything or most things you need for the exam. You can use it in the exam. It has the IPA table with the vowels and the consonants, some additional diacritics. It has a sonority scale. I think we haven't quite spoken about this yet. I'll come later. The vocal tract. Some ideas about feature geometry. I haven't talked about this. I'll mention this in a second. And some additional sounds and variant notation. So it's quite a complete table. It's worth for you to look at it a little bit. Now, to the features, which is the point of this talk. You have them here. These are the most common features, and with these features you can distinguish quite a few sounds. Now, recall, features are about contrasting sounds, and that's what we're doing here, and we basically only want to use as many features as we need and no more. In the IPA system, you use all the features to be as precise as possible about the actual pronunciation of the phonemes. With distinctive features, if we're describing a language, we don't want that. We want to have just enough features to capture all the contrasts that are there. So here are a few examples of what I'm talking about. So we want to distinguish consonants here on top from vowels, and that's done with the consonantal feature, which I mentioned before. And all the consonants have a plus value in that feature. Laryngeals are actually not consonants according to this table. That's because they often pattern regarding their consonantal status with vowels and semi-vowels. This might be a little bit counterintuitive, but it makes sense for many languages. So then we have the sonorant feature, which includes nasals and liquids, which are here. So mostly this nasals, and etc. The semi-vowels and the vowels. So what we're saying here is that these groups of sounds, vowels, glides, and nasals and liquids, share some phonological status together. One example of this, if you remember, was syllabicity. I think I mentioned most syllables have as a nucleus, as a peak, a vowel, but you can also have syllabic consonants. And the syllabic consonants are the nasals and the liquids. So I think I gave you the famous Bulgarian example of Vilk, which is wolf and doesn't have a vowel, just Vilk. And that's the point here. Now, then you have the syllabic feature, and this only includes vowels. So here we're saying vowels behave differently from glides, nasals, affricates, laryngeals, etc. They build a group. This is not very surprising, but the interesting point and the important point here is you have three different groups, and there is partial overlap in how you classify certain sounds here in these groups, and the grouping will depend on what you're targeting, on what sort of aspect of their behavior you're targeting. I hope that's not too abstract. So again, vowels behave like vowels in certain contexts, which neither of these can do. However, vowels, glides, and nasals behave together similarly in certain contexts, which these sounds cannot do. And consonants, including nasals, behave the same in certain contexts, which glides and vowels cannot do. And that's what we're expressing with these three main class features: consonantal, sonorant, and syllabic. However, we also need to distinguish between sounds in the consonantal group, for example, or in the vowel group, right? And here also. So we want to be able to distinguish between all sounds, and that's why we have many more features. And here's, for example, labial, and labial features capture the behavior of p, b, f, v, f, and b, and v. Sorry, that's difficult. However, they also capture vowels and glides. So here we're basically saying labials, vowels, glides, and this group of sounds are labials. And also p and m. The phonetic reasoning is that they are articulated with both lips, but the point again is about phonological behavior. There are some contexts in which these sounds will behave as a unit. Then you have rounding, and here the zeros come into play, which is what I mentioned before. In this case, you can see the labial and round features are sort of mutually exclusive in a sense that if they are not labial, then they cannot have rounding. So non-labial non-labial sounds cannot be rounded by definition because they do not make use of the lips for articulation. In this case, rounding, you would say that this group of sounds is not rounded. This group of sounds is also not rounded. You have some glides, and I can't pronounce this one, sorry, are not rounded, while this other one are rounded. And again, you can contrast the rounded vowels versus the non-rounded vowels. Then we go down for coronals, and now coronals are distinguishing consonants or groups of consonants from each other. Now we have here all the coronals, here are the non-coronals, and these sounds are articulated by moving the main articulator, the tongue, up. We're still not distinguishing between place of articulation, but we're distinguishing between these sounds which move the tongue up and these sounds which don't. And you also have some here which are also coronal. You have anterior, whether they are in front or not, and again you see the point that anterior doesn't make any sense for non-coronal sounds, and they particularly don't make any sense for vowels. Now, with anterior, you're starting to distinguish between this in front and this further back. You have distributed, which again is a different sort of distinction. Again, about being coronal or not. So it's exclusive with non-coronal ones. Then we come to dorsals. Remember, this was with the dorsum of the tongue, and here you're targeting these sets of sound and these sets of sounds. So I'm not going to go through every single feature, that would be way too annoying, but I want to give you some examples of something interesting here, maybe. Yeah, so we saw these features. These are about pharyngeals, and with these two features we can distinguish between the three pharyngeals, for example. Now, for vowels, you see some features don't make any sense for vowels. Many features don't distinguish between the vowels. For example, everything from here down doesn't allow us to distinguish between vowels, but there are some features which do. For example, whether they're high or low, back or tense. And an interesting feature about features is that they help us cluster together some vowels with some consonants based on some of the features, and being high or low or back are some of them. Yeah. Let's see, I had an example which I wanted to discuss. I think it's this one. Yes. So consider these two sounds, the unrounded U and the slightly lower U. I'm sorry, I cannot pronounce them properly, but the point here I want to show you is they're here and here. So for the first three features, they are identical. Then second to labial and rounded, they are identical. Coronal, anterior, and distributed, they are identical. Dorsal, identical. High, identical. Low, they are minus low, they are identical. Back, they are plus back, because they're in the back, so they are identical. Tens, and they are distinguished. So up here we have plus tens, and down here we have minus tens. And they are also distinguished, no, they are only distinguished in tenseness. Yeah, so they share a lot of properties, but we can distinguish them just by one feature. This is a very useful table which shows you the phonological feature description about for this sort of phonetic table of vowels. And I thought I had an ATR example, but maybe I don't, or I forgot, I'm sorry. Ah, no, I have it. Right, so, do I have it? Yes, so the distinction between this O and this O is basically ATR. And this is about the structure of the tone root. So here is the distinction. Okay, good. My suggestion is download the table, take a look at it, try to understand different contrasts, and an exercise you can try to do at home, which will be part of the exam, is that I am going to give you we're going to give you a phoneme, for example a P, and ask you find me phonemes which are identical to P except for one feature, or except for two features, and you have to find them in the table. And then you should explain what's the difference between those phonemes, phonetically and phonologically. All right. Now, good. But back to feature bundles. We can use feature bundles to represent phonemes, and then because we can use feature bundles to represent phonemes, we can use them in words. This is an example of the word deep, and we can represent this word as a set or as a list of feature bundles like this. And that's basically for today's. I will upload the next one probably today, for Thursday. And thank you.